I was asked a wonderful question, and I shared it even in our prayer just a moment ago, and that is, how do I share Jesus in the midst of this broken world? I shared two thoughts with you earlier this week in our newsletter. The first thought was this: don't live in the cries of Good Friday. Live in the confidence of Resurrection Sunday. So let me ask you, where are you living, church family? Where are you living today? Are you living in the cries of Good Friday, or are you living in the confidence of Resurrection Sunday? Because that is what's going to make the difference. We as a church, and I mean the global church, not just Nashwauk Baptist, but if we were truly going to see the transforming power of God work in the hearts and lives of people, including our own hearts and lives, then we need to be coming day in and day out expecting God to show up. So let me ask you, when you came here today, and again, I'm not asking for a show of hands, but when you came here today, did you come expecting God to show up? Or did you come knowing that you were going to see some friends and some neighbors? Maybe you haven't seen them all week. Maybe you haven't seen them longer than that. To catch up on how life is going with one another. And that's great and wonderful. But first and foremost, family, every time we show up and gather like this, we need to be expecting God to show up. Because He is the only one. He is the only one that can transform and can change lives. Can you say amen to that this morning? That's how it's going to change. And that's why you've heard me for the last year and a half come back to this idea of keeping Jesus at the center. And that raises all kinds of questions with some of the issues that we're facing in society. And I even jotted some of them down just this morning as I was sitting in my office. And that is, well, if that's the case, Chris, with everything that's going on in our world, is there no longer a standard of good and evil? Is there not right and wrong anymore? Is there not black and white? Here's my response. Jesus is the standard. And He is in the middle of everything that is going on. Huh? Jesus is the standard, and He is in the middle of everything that is going on. That takes me to Psalm 32. The NIV phrases it this way: "Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit there is no deceit." The Passion Translation phrases the second half of that verse this way: "For He wipes their slates clean and removes hypocrisy from their hearts." And so when it comes to this, okay, well, what do we do with the right and wrong question, the good and evil question? Let me remind you how Jesus shared forgiveness with His disciples when He was asked, well, how many times should I forgive somebody? 7? That's not what Jesus' response was. Jesus was no. He said 70 times. 70 times, 7 times. In other words, forgiveness is an ongoing process. It's something that doesn't stop in your life. It's something that doesn't stop in my life. In order for God to create in us a clean slate so that there is a spirit of no deceit, it's a constant process of moving to the middle. That is the center, because that is where Jesus is. And so when there's issues in our society that come up and we don't know what to do, and we may be on this side and there may be somebody on this side, and we're disagreeing and we're thinking, what do we do this? How am I supposed to show love to this individual? We meet them in the middle. Maybe I can share with you two illustrations, some things that have happened to me in the last few months to try and unpack that. The first one is this. As you know, I'm privileged on a regular basis to come alongside families in this community that are grieving. And they're looking for spiritual care. They don't have a local church. They don't have a priest. They don't have an imam. They don't have someone they can look to just be present and to guide them as they're grieving. And I've been privileged over the past number of years to receive countless phone calls from local funeral homes here in the city. And on this one particular occasion, as I met with this family, and I shared this story with one of our Bible study groups earlier this week. As I met with this family and I talked with the funeral director, they said, pretty traditional service as far as the elements. There'll be some music, some remarks, a prayer, these types of things. But then they said that the individual that's giving the eulogy is the ex-wife of the gentleman that's passed away. I said, okay. Well, as I arrived at the funeral home, and what I discovered was, in part, the reason the ex-wife was giving the eulogy for this gentleman that had passed away is that she had left him for another woman. You might be thinking, okay, Chris, what did you do with that? Chris, you honestly, you don't agree with what's happened there, do you? You don't, Chris, you don't agree with that. What did you do with that? What did you tell them? Well, that's just one part of the story. I'll come back to that. The second part of the story is the daughter of this lady and of the gentleman that had passed away. I met with the two of them before the service, and we were just chatting, and they said, we're, our hearts are hurting today. I said, yes, I can imagine. You're grieving the loss. And they said, no. They said, you don't understand. They said, I have a son. The other lady said, I have a grandson who we're estranged from. We haven't seen him in 18 months. But we've called him, we've reached out to him to let him know that his grandfather has passed away, and we don't know whether he's going to show up today, but we're kind of hoping that he does. We'd just like to say hello. And I said, okay. And so then it was coming close to the time of the service, and the service began, and I got up and I shared some opening remarks, and then the ex-wife came and she shared some beautiful remarks about her ex-husband, how caring he was, how loving he was towards his family, how they continued to keep a friendship despite their differences. It was beautiful. And then she said to the people that had gathered, she said, I want to do something here this afternoon. And as a clergy, as soon as you hear somebody say that, your ears perk up because you think, okay, where's this going? And then they proceeded to say, I want to lead you in a prayer. And I thought, okay. Because I also had noticed that she was indigenous. She had a native necklace around her neck. And I thought, okay, so what's the prayer that she's going to lead these people in that have gathered to remember her ex-husband? And she started, trembling in her voice, she started to lead them in the prayer that we shared together today, the Our Father. And she got no more than 2 sentences in, and she couldn't get any farther. She just broke. And I walked up to this dear lady, and I just gently put my arm around her, and I said, that's okay. I said, we'll lead it together. And it was a beautiful, holy moment. God was present as they heard those words. God, would you forgive? God, you are here. You are the Holy One. That's what these people were saying. It was a beautiful moment, and we could have just stopped the service right there. It was beautiful. But the service continued, and I shared some remarks from the 23rd Psalm about how God will meet you in the darkest moments of your life. You don't have to try and climb up out of the pit that you're in, whatever this is that's holding you back, whatever it is that's weighing you down. God will go there. In fact, He already is there at your deepest, darkest moments. That's why He's the great shepherd. And that's what I shared. So then after the service was over, I talked with a few folks, and then I noticed the ex-wife, she came over, and she was just beaming. She was just smiling from ear to ear. And she said, today was a good day. And she said, in fact, today was a great day. And part of me was kind of puzzled. I thought, wait a second, you just were saying goodbye to your ex-husband. How is today a good day? And she said, I saw my grandson today. And then the daughter came over, and her husband was there, and he said to me, he said, yeah. He said, we had an opportunity to talk with our grandson today. And I looked at him, and I looked at this lady, and I said, perhaps today is the beginning of healing. Friends, what I don't want you to miss in that story is there are many different ways how I could have responded to all that was happening there. I could have ignored the whole ex-wife, the whole left her ex-husband for another woman. I could have ignored all that. I could have ignored the fact that they had even said, we're looking for a grandson. I could have just said, okay, funeral home, I'm here, I've got my words in front of me, I'm propped up, I say my words, and where's my check, and I leave. But I didn't do that. In those moments, as tender and as beautiful as they were, I became very aware and attuned to God's presence. Now, I know I haven't answered the question of, well, Chris, what did you do with the situation there with an ex-wife giving a eulogy and all that's there? You want to know what I did? I left it with God. And sometimes, friends, in the midst of a broken world that we live in, that's all we can do. And that's what God asks us to do. He doesn't ask us to try and solve all the world's problems. He doesn't ask us to come alongside people that view life differently than us and how they're looking at life and how they're trying to figure out who they are. He's not asking you and I to go and tell them, well, you need to become or you need to do this. What God is asking you and I is to be present with them. Why? Because as it says in Psalm 32, when you and I know the joy of being forgiven, that forgiveness unlocks our heart to the love of Jesus. And we no longer live in the cries of Good Friday. Because when Jesus was hanging on a cross and he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. They didn't realize all that was going on, and yet there was the heart of Jesus forgiving them. And church, that's what he's calling you and I to do. One other story. And I apologize, Brianna, because I didn't ask your permission ahead of time. But I know you'll be okay with this. We were having a conversation at the dinner table a few nights ago, and as you know, Policy 713 is a very hot-button topic right now in this province. I'm not going to try and unpack that for you this morning. In fact, I'm not even necessarily going to give you my own point of view on it, because if there's one thing I know, it's not that you and I, as followers of Jesus doesn't call us to prance into politics. He calls us to pray for our politicians. He doesn't call us to prance into politics. He calls us to pray for our politicians. And so with this very hot button topic on the surface, Brianna mentioned to Pam and I that their coach had asked them to wear rainbow-colored shirts for their warm-up in support of what's been happening as it relates to homophobia and transphobia and what's going on, just to be there to let these young people know that first and foremost, and really what ultimately matters, is that they are loved. And so we chatted about that, and we unpacked it a little bit, and to be really honest with you, I don't remember all that was shared at the table, but as I took some time after the fact to reflect on it, and I thought, okay, so my daughter is going to go and she's going to wear a rainbow-colored shirt alongside her teammates to let these young people know that they are loved right where they are, right here and now. What is that really saying? And let me be really transparent with you. One of the things I've really struggled with in recent weeks that I've heard from all sources and all kinds of places, and a word that's being used, and a word that's been used very strongly from any number of angles, it's the word hate. And church, what breaks my heart is when I hear people saying that the Christian message is a message of hate. Because I got to tell you, maybe it's the Christian message in some context, but it is not the message of Jesus the Christ. Thank you, Victoria. There should have been more amens to that statement. Did you hear what I just said? The message of Jesus the Christ has never been hate. Ever. And so as I began to think that through with what Brianna was about to do, what occurred to me was, at least for me, and this is where I don't speak for Brianna, because she wore that jersey for her own reasons, okay? If you want to ask her about that, you go ahead. But for me, as I thought about my daughter and what she was doing, that jersey was saying that all people are unique and wonderful, and they are loved by God. That's it. That's it. Nothing more, nothing else. Hear me clearly, church, when I say that. All people are unique and wonderful, created by God. Go right back to the Psalms. You were created in your mother's womb. And I know there's a whole lot of other issues that need to be unpacked there. I understand that. But friends, what I don't want us to miss in the midst of what's happening, even in our province right now, is that all people are fearfully and wonderfully made. And when we say, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," God is the creator of all. Now let me be very clear. I am not saying, and I am not speaking a universalist salvation. Let me be very clear on that. Remember, I shared with you last week the thought of a gentleman that I had visited. A Christian is not so much about you and I knowing Christ as it is about Christ knowing you. And only God can visit with you as an individual, with me as an individual, and make that transforming work. The choice is up to you. The choice is up to me whether we decide whether or not we want to be eternally present with God or not. That's still our choice. God loves each of us that much. But God does not call you and I to be the judge of His fellow humanity. He calls us to walk with them, which means there are going to be people that we do not see eye to eye with. And that's why Jesus walks in the middle. It's not that we see the black and white, the right and wrong. It's that we only see Jesus. And that's what David is saying in Psalm 32 about wiping the slate clean. It's so that there would be no spirit of deceit in you, no spirit of deceit in me. I can't answer for you whether or not you know Jesus and how Jesus is knowing you. That's not my place. That's between you and Him. But what I can do, and what God has called me to do, is to love. Now, maybe as I've tried to unpack some of my thoughts with you today as it relates to Psalm 32 and this idea of having that forgiveness spirit always, remember it's a continual process. Maybe you're still wrestling with it. Maybe it still doesn't seem fully clear. I want you to know that's okay too. Because this issue and many other issues that our world faces are bigger than you. They're bigger than me. But God has called us not to solve the world's problems. He has called us to love the world. And that's how there will be change.